So let's have a little lesson on this piece. This comes from my new book, the Grade 1 repertoire lessons. There's a link for that under the video, but feel free to watch the video for free and just get ideas on how I would approach practicing a piece, so you can apply this to other pieces that you're playing. My book goes through 8 pieces and has a couple pages of lessons followed by the actual piece, so you can check that out if you wish. So 2 main things with this piece is first thing, slurs. That's something that hasn't occurred in my method books very much or in this book yet, so we're looking at slurs on the classical guitar. Nice easy slurs, but slurs nevertheless. And also muting the bass. That's not something like muting voices. We haven't talked about that very much outside of like complete mutes on rests. But this is just going to be muting one voice while you're still playing another voice. So the first thing I would recommend is that you practice the slurs in isolation. So slurs are, in guitar lingo, hammer-ons and pull-offs. You should practice those in isolation by taking the slurs from the piece and practicing them on their own as an exercise. So the first bar, the first slur that occurs is an ascending slur or hammer-on with the first finger from an open string. That first slur, we should practice that in isolation. Remember, you're playing the string, and then it doesn't take strength. You just have to snap your finger right into place. So make sure you're close to the fret, your finger's curved, that you're doing a light kind of snap into the string rather than like using force. So nice light snap, curved finger on your fingertip. So you play. And make sure also that the rhythm is very even, that you're actually playing 8th notes. 1 and 2 and 3, or sorry, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and... Students have a tendency to go... They think of the slur as being fast, but it isn't. It's just regular rhythms, right? So make sure you're using your ear and not letting your fingers decide what the rhythm is going to be. The second slur in the first bar, very similar, it's just on the second string. So you can just turn that into an exercise and practice it on its own. Of course, I recommend practicing a more thorough slur exercise using all the different combos, but that's kind of outside of this book and outside of this piece. You can check out my technique book if you want to see like a ton of slur exercises. Now, in bar 12, you have descending slurs. So you're going to play the 4th finger and then pluck the string with the 4th finger to get it to sound. Now, if you lift your finger just off the string, like an electric guitarist would, you'll get a very soft second note, which is fine. You might want that sometimes. But if you want a clear second note and a second note that is close to the first note, then pull down or like pull into your hand. If you just lift your finger off, it works, but it's not very clear, right? In bar 13, you have a first finger descending slur or pull off into the open string. That's bar 13. The slur exercise, you could just do continuous. Okay, so remember, slurs simply facilitate legato phrasing. You can play this piece without slurs. Sounds fine, right? Slurs just make it as legato as possible and reduce the number of right-hand fingerings that you have to do. So make sure you're practicing those slur exercises on their own so that when you go to play the piece, you're already in good shape to play it. Now, muting the bass. So in the first half of this piece, there are rests in the bass, but not in the second half. So that kind of indicates that the composer Giuliani wants you to mute the basses in the first half. When you see basses in guitar music, it's not always going to be that you're going to mute it. Sometimes it's like a notation thing. And depending on what era we're in or who the composer is, you may or may not mute the bass rests. But it really depends. Like sometimes people don't write the rests in because, or they don't write rests because they want it to sustain. Other times they'll write it in even if they want it to sustain because they don't want to put tons of like ties and junk in the score to make it look like it sustains. So it's an interpretive choice. Now before we practice this, if you find this too difficult, don't do it. Practice the piece without the mutes, come back to it later. Learn the piece, get comfortable with the piece, and then add the bass mute in later. I don't really consider this a grade 1 skill, but I did put it in the book because it's not the hardest example of it, and it gives you someone who's a little bit more ambitious from this grade level might want to start looking at this. But like I said, if it's too difficult, just go on without it and come back to it later. So the first bass mute, the way I've written it out is I just write up to the note where the rest occurs, and then you can stop. So it's just like a little exercise. You take a little bit of the piece. Sorry. So you can see, like when I got to here, to see how my thumb went down back onto the 6th string, that's because I need to stop the sound. Now, you could let it ring out. Sounds fine, but it's a little bit different of a thing, and that C might not be part of the E harmony. So the note that you end on is not really part of the chord from before, so therefore I'm muting it. So you should practice this in isolation. The first one's kind of tricky because there's a bit of a slur in the top part, but we could try the second one. Again, mute the A string. So you have to put your thumb back on the string, this thumb here, put it back on the string to stop the sound. But it has to be very synchronized with the top note because you're playing a note while muting a bass. It's kind of like two things at once, right? Do you see how that I have to play that note and mute it at the same time? Here's another example. Now you'll notice sometimes like that time I'm muting the E that I played over here and I'm putting my thumb back down, but you can still hear it. That's because these strings will also ring. Don't worry about that. This is getting too picky for this grade level, but just put your thumb on the 4th string. The notation in my book says specifically, mute the low E string with your thumb. Mute the low A string with your thumb. It's pretty clear in the exercises what to do. So then you just have to start going through the first half of the piece. Mute, 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 mute. It's a tough little technique, but it's a great opportunity to practice it, and it will be needed later on. So give it a try, but if it gives you trouble, don't worry about it. But besides that, the rest of the piece, I mean, it's a very melody-driven piece. Just make that top melody sound very legato and beautiful, and keep everything rhythmically even, and then add those slurs in and add the muting in, and you'll find it pretty challenging of a piece, I think, in the end. It's an easy piece in one way. It's like easy to play. There's nothing awkward. But those two techniques, slurs and muting, can be challenging. So take your time, go very slow. Practice the exercises first and then the piece.